Welcome to Lore Citizen, a podcast dedicated to all things Star Citizen lore. If you enjoy this, make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow all of our social medias. Without further ado, let's get started. Hello and welcome back. It's been a long time. It's been several months since we've done one of these Lore Citizens. We've been trying to get, to put some perspective, we've been trying to get together to do Lore Citizens since like January. And since these are once a month things, it's kind of hard to do sometimes.
It's slowly becoming quarterly, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to do it more often, but I mean, the problem is that the times we usually do this is usually mid-afternoon for me, like right after I get off of work. Then for Jale, it's the ungodly ass crack of the morning, and for like in terms of like super late at night, and for
it's like midnight. Yeah,
and then for Al, it's like 5 a.m. So
yeah, if we do it at a normal time, it's 5 a.m. We're a bit later today. It's super late for Jale because it's like 11 o'clock in the morning for me now. So
yeah. So let's get started with the theme for today. Of course, I'm just going to go over what Lore Citizen is. If you've never seen this before or listened to this before, Lore Citizen is where we talk about lore, Star Citizen lore. Us three are all lore aficionados. We all do lore content in our own ways. So we get together and just talk lore. Sometimes we have good themes where we're talking about a specific event or chronology or whatever. But today is just kind of a fun day. We're just kind of doing something that was fun. Originally, the plan was to have Space Tomato come on and we'd all pitch him these ideas for these various people and he would judge which one he thought was the most interesting. So now it's you, the listener and the viewer, get to choose which of these three is the most interesting. So whoever and Jale, I'm sure will pay top dollar for anyone voting for his his choice.
Remember, I'm not about buying votes.
he'll translate whatever you like into Xian or Banu or maybe even Tavaran. That would be a challenge because I don't think there's Tavaran language yet.
Yeah. And remember, Al is Old Man Hurston, so he has all of the money.
That's right. That's right, Paulie. You know how it goes.
All right, let's get started with. Speaking of Al, let's start with you. Who is your interesting person? Who is the most interesting person you're going to bring to the verse for us to talk about today?
He's actually a nobody, an ordinary, everyday ship captain, Captain Laramie Stevens of the Solomon. Ship captain from around 2779, 74, 99, etc. He was working through the Bremen system. He'd been mining. He'd been picking up minerals from, doing mining and in the asteroid belts around there. And he was returning to Ritif to deliver his cargo. And he sent out a distress signal. People responding to his distress signal got there was nothing. No ship, no wreckage, nothing. A salvage operator later discovered the black box and handed it in. And the black box reports that as he was returning, he was attacked by unnamed pirates. They couldn't identify the pirates from the black box there. Identifiers were off. No one was ever punished for it, for the attack. Proto-Life declared that the ship had been destroyed. But, as I said, no wreckage has ever been discovered. What makes this interesting, though, is approximately every 10 years, people in the Bremen Defence Force or pilots who are out get a distress signal and they go to check it out. And it's always from Captain Stevens of the Solomon, always declaring that he's under attack and needs assistance. But when the pilots arrive, or when help arrives, there is nothing. No trace, no ship, no wreckage, no pirates. Narrow scans, broad scans, everything is empty. And we don't know. He's a mystery. One in character a guy who tried to assist him, Ptolemy Winsome, asked, is he stuck in the third dimension? Is he stuck, unable to get out, stuck in the never of a jump point? popping out just briefly every so often before he's sucked back in. So that's my interesting character.
Always gonna love a
that
good
comes,
ghost
by
ship.
the way.
Yeah.
And by the way, that goes from the Spectrum series, The Untold Tales, which is an in-game show, a bit like, Untold Mysteries of a World or anything like that. So
Nice.
there's a whole series of these types of stories in The Untold Tales, but this is quite an interesting one, I think.
See, I always do like a spooky mystery series for lore at the end of the year. I'm gonna have to go through the Untold Tales. Forgot those exist. I'm gonna go through those and get them for good ideas. But
yeah, and these didn't come out as part of the Halloween series. The story from The Untold Tales, this was the Unanswered Cry, and it was first published in June 21st, 2017.
Okay, nice.
So they're not even these aren't even Halloween stories. These are just stories of weird things that are out there. But it really picks up what people
I think an interesting sci-fi. I think an interesting sci-fi theme that it plays on with Star System though. Very recently we've had all the lore about regeneration, and people are like, oh, it's just space magic, and people also talk about AI a lot. The humans of Star System seem really like accepting of technology that they don't actually understand, like jump points. They don't really fully understand them, but they use them, and regeneration. Whereas like they're deathly afraid of the AI, which they kind of do understand and did create. I always kind of funny if they have like almost a blind spot to things that they don't understand.
To me, it kind of picked up themes that have been just explored, at least in, I think Star Trek has explored this type of thing. B5 certainly did. I think we saw it in kind of the Nostromo or the Ghost Ship kind of coming out of the hyperjoint 100 years later or whatever it was. But B5 kind of had it where the ship was in the exploration ship was stuck in the jump point, and they had to try and get it out, and it was so it's kind of mixing all those types of things. But the thing that really gets me with this is we just don't really know, and it's really picks up things that I think it was a live stream with you when we were with Croncy the other week, or when I was doing something with Inforunners. People were saying, oh, are we going to have these kind of Bermuda Triangle things or mysteries? And we said, oh yeah, well, there are missing ships, but this is an example of them. There's other stories in the Unanswered Cry, like there's one about coming home, which is a really interesting one as well, about guy who was fighting the Vandal in Caliban. So quite a few mysteries that we just don't know the answers to, and leave us wondering.
Excellent. Jale, I want to go on to you with your most interesting person or people.
My most interesting person, I'm going to say it's Acid Reader, but I think that you need his two compatriots along with him. So it's really a trio of people, and they're the trio who founded Rayari Incorporated, who you might know from exploring Microtech. They've got a lot of stations across there. So I want to take it back to 2778, and the Empire is in a period of instability that we'd later recognize as like the start of its decline, the start of its fall. So it's 21 years after Anthony Tanaka got publicly executed for like disobeying an order, and that kind of spark has grown into like a widespread civil dissent. And the Imperator, Ulysses Mesa X at the time, he was just obsessed with the idea that he could like build his way out of this crisis by making lots of nice architecture, including the Canos Stadium, which he thought, oh, everyone's going to unite behind me as soon as I complete this stadium, which was completely delusional. But he was kind of sane enough to recognize that it's still a few years off. I need something to tide me over, and said, right, University of the UE, give me something good, make it quick, and I'll give you all the money you need to do it. So meanwhile, you got these three young research scientists slogging away in a lab, the agricultural department at UPark, which is in the Mentor system, Rator system, the Rator system. And it's kind of like MIT crossed with DARPA. It's all where all the black site projects happen. It's really kind of like hardcore physics university. But they're in the agricultural department, and you got Edward Kesselman, who's this biochemist, Clara Douglas, who's an agricultural biotechnologist, and Asif Reader is this geneticist. And together they're working on some preservatives project, but they drop that, they go, it's not going anywhere. There's this big money to do something cool. Let's get our heads together, come up with an idea. So they started talking about things they know, and Clara had come from Hyperion, which is this planet in a pirate system. It's the only pirate system that's officially claimed by the UEE. And it had been a terraforming disaster, so it was just a windswept desert. Nothing really grew there, apart from like one plant, which was from Terra, and it was an Altrucia tree. And when it was planted there, it rapidly adapted and became this tree that's known as the Revenant tree. And Edward contributed to the conversation by talking about a 19th century practice that was really common in vineyards, where there was a problem with aphids, and if you took the grapes from the plant you wanted to grow and grafted it onto a root which was resistant to aphids, you'd have this aphid-resistant tree with all the properties you want. So they thought, hang on, what if we could do this on a bigger scale, or even on like an alien scale? We take a crop that we want and grow it on the roots of something that can grow on that planet. So, if possible, this wouldn't just be, this kind of flash in the pan morale booster that the Emperor want. It could really revolutionize human colonization. So happily, their project was selected, and even managed to survive through the coup that deposed Ulysses, because most of the government was just trying to keep their head down because Linton Messer was like purging left and right, so everyone was just sort of, don't bother him, so they managed to sneak through. However, what really killed it off was Garin 2, but not Garin 2 as you're thinking about it. So they basically pinched Asif Reader from the team to go on the team that would study Garin 2. Garin 2 should be familiar to you by now. It's the planet where the Empire massacred the indigenous life, leading to the revolution. Now, something I didn't really appreciate from that is that the general public knew about the sentient life that had been discovered there, and the Emperor was actually boasting that they're going to uplift them. Now, Asif was certainly caught up in what happened because he'd been selected to be part of the team, to study them. So, Reader, as part of this Shahairless team, spent years studying the planet, studying its life, and they were being really strict not to interfere with the sentient life that was there, because they didn't want to affect their culture, because they were technologically primitive, but like cultured. So unfortunately, the Emperor got bored and greed prevailed. What really broke Shahairless, who was this team leader, was that the Emperor's chief advisor and cousin, because that's how the Messers do, was leading a tour of the planet in full view of the aliens, breaking all the careful quarantine they've been practicing for years, and pitching it for sale to corporate interests, even joking where they'd put their summer house. So Shahairless, who was the team leader, he went and leaked the news to press and ended up in an Empire's Light conversion center on Charon for his bravery, having been betrayed by one of his team. Now, it's not explicitly clear what Reader did next. He spent years on this project, and he certainly didn't do anything proactive because the whole team was sort of terrified into silence. But it's not likely that he's the one that betrayed Shahairless. But 3 years later, terraforming would start on Garin 2, and somebody leaked footage of the dying natives to the anti-Messer group Tide, and it kind of seemed like the Emperor was just hoping that people would forget that he'd promised that he was going to be uplifting these people, or not care enough, or otherwise be able to cover up, but he was wrong, and that's when the Messers fall. So in the wake of the revolution, the three scientists came together, so that's Edward, Clara, and Asif, once more, and they started a private business together, Rayari. Now, Rayari was originally just going to be a think tank, working on ideas to sell rather than having a particular product. But their big break would again actually come from Garin 2. The Senate had announced a plan to restore Garin 2 and undo that devastation they'd caused by terraforming, which was a huge opportunity for the new scientific venture, but it was also a personal opportunity for Asif Reader to atone for his part in, maybe not what he did, but maybe what he didn't do to stop it. So in 2803, Rayari really burst into everyone's public consciousness because they revealed plants that they'd adapted through that earlier idea they'd been working on that were the indigenous life of Garin 2, faithfully reconstructed from the notes and the samples they'd taken, but grafted onto roots that could grow in the contaminated soil. This was a success and is now rolled out across Garin 2. So in the 90 years since the last founder died, the company has become a lot more commercial under new leadership, but as part of their charter, they still spend lots of R&D. So that's part of why you see it all across Microtech, because it's all in keeping with this idea that they're the leaders in making plants grow in hostile environments. I think that the reason why I think that they're really important, really interesting, is because it really mirrors like Norman Borlaug, who was a real scientist who saved 1 billion lives on Earth by the ideas that became the Green Revolution in the 20th century. And he's not a household name, but he's probably saved more lives than anyone else that you in history. And I kind of really like the way that it's. I really like the way that the Star Citizen storytelling of this is saying there was this big thing which is called the Revolution, but there's lots of little stories that thread through it in their own way, being touched by it. And it's all these little threads which I think actually make a very kind of cohesive story.
Yeah, I agree. That's very cool. Like that's something I had never heard of. I hadn't gone through the Rayari stuff. That makes a lot more sense. As Al was saying earlier, you know, you always wonder why did the
Why Garan is that
why was that the
catalyst?
straw? Why was that straw that broke the camel's back? And it's like, oh, it's because Lintoned all over himself, as Linton is wanted to do, because Linton was an idiot. Like the more you learn about it, the more you just like this guy was a petulant child with an atomic bomb, which is always a nasty thing to have. So
It kind of, if you pick up the Romanesque images of the Empire, it kind of does feel like this almost like a Nero type character, doesn't he? He's kind of this.
mhm.
Oh, I want to be an artist. I want to do this. Oh, I've changed my mind. I'm doing this. So
Yeah.
really
I
does
always
come
read
across.
I read Linton more as the Caligula to Ulysses Nero.
Yeah.
You know, Ulysses was fiddling with architecture while the empire was burning, whereas Linton was the one who was,
Yes, that's true. That's true.
making his horse the chancellor kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we often look at Rome and we say, oh, Nero built the Colosseum, but he didn't. He built this massive palace. The only thing in the Colosseum that links back to Nero is that massive statue of Nero that's out the front. Because the Romans, the next emperor, basically bulldozed the temple and built the Colosseum to kind of almost wipe anything from Nero off the face of the map. But yeah, there's kind of that. You can kind of see those threads of Rome coming through,
And I really like
strongly in the history.
I also like your mention of what was his name, the from the historical that's kind of a parallel to of the Green Revolution.
Oh, Norman Borlaug.
Because that's something that Star Citizen lore does a lot, where they'll take someone or something that's like maybe obscure or someone in history which not everyone knows about, and then use them as a basis for their own storytelling, weaving it into the story in a way that makes sense and then adds to the overall blanket that is the lore.
Yeah.
So I feel like mine is just underwhelming now, because I'll start with mine.
Well, you always start off small and then you get the pinnacle and then you kind of
yeah. So I'm gonna tell you a tale about ego, about avarice, about flying too close to the sun. A modern day Icarus in Mr. Russell Valen. Now, Russell Valen graduated high school, passed his equivalency at 12 years old. He attended a handful of universities in Rhetor and completed a triple doctorate by the age of 24. He received a illustrious grant for his dissertation entitled "The Theoretical Applications of Antimatter Propulsion." He was a firm believer in expanding human horizons. He had a passion that basically said, we are limited by jump points. We need to control our own destiny. He's famous as saying, like, there could be a system closer to Sol than Croshaw that has a vast interstellar civilization that we will never see because we don't have FTL. We don't have the ability to get to them because they don't have a jump point attached to them. And his ideas were seen as extreme, but he was very dedicated. After he became very dedicated, he was incredibly smart, incredibly good at his job. And so a lot of people vehemently kind of agreed with him. So he sequestered himself after making a big stink about this in the scientific community and gathered data from any source he could find on this, and was privately funded by the Banu merchants, by Banu companies, and the Xi'an government, as well as the human government. And in this, he even was able to get access to controversial experiments done by the Mezzers, like unethical experiments done by the Mezzers on FTL. And so finally, in 2882, 10 years after he started this, he emerged, not as the same kind of quiet, confident, but shy of the limelight kind of genius, but a madman. Bold and paranoid. He thought he had conquered the equation. He knew it to be true, and he desperately tried to not let anybody else steal his ideas. So he gathered the press and famous people from Spectrum and the government to witness as he built what he called the Chariot engine. And the Chariot engine he installed into his own ship. And he called it a testament to the brilliance of Nick Croshaw, as well as a condemnation of the shackles of his discovery brought upon humanity. Because he did this in the Croshaw system, in Angeli. He unveiled his chariot on the chariot. He got aboard the ship, pushed away from the station, and said, "I leap forward to unveil the universe." And the explosion was so massive, it nearly killed the entire station. Hundreds of people were killed. Dozens of people were injured. And it was a mind-boggling failure. Because he was so paranoid about his technology falling into his rival's hands, he had never tested the technology. He'd only run simulations and was like, the math works. And the best part about this is that at the end, the celebrated satirist Lassie Hartwell, who was just starting his career as a journalist for the Terra Gazette, summed up the display with what would become his signature type of humor. While the scientific community and Spectrum representatives had probably turned out expecting a failure, there was a small part in all of us that was hoping for something monumental. On the bright side, Dr. Valen's engine and ship exploded faster than any ship I had ever seen before. That's
droll.
That's Dr. Valen. Dr. Valen, the genius who blew himself up because of
in defense of Dr. Valen, how can we be sure that isn't how it's supposed to work? Working as intended. Was there a ship left over at the end?
Was the damage? Did they pick up any remains? Was that this explosion just the ship going into the next dimension or going to the next system and going faster than light?
That's true. There were only a few remnants of the ship left. There were only bits and pieces. So if the ship had actually gone FTL, it may have just been things that popped off the ship.
Lost a heat tile or something like that as it was going, and it lands in the new system, and oh crap, I've got no fuel left. Or oh crap.
I'd like to imagine that he's managed to crack getting up to light speed, but he's still working on getting back down to regular speeds. It's like, where's the
stop? He's a fascinating guy because whenever I heard that, I just imagined this like absolute madman blowing himself up for science. It's literally the "for science, boom" kind of meme right there. So.
I got images of Dr. Emmett Brown.
Yes, where we're going, we don't need jump points.
I think it's interesting that the three of us have been asked to choose the most interesting people. We've all kind of chosen people who, in one way or another, failed.
Yeah.
You got somebody who got lost. You got someone who blew himself up, and my guy, he maybe the most successful of them, but he still accidentally was involved in a genocide, and like his life dream of science kind of turned into someone's business.
Yeah.
There's all a bit of Pyrrhic victory to everything.
I actually like the idea that your character's actually bookended by two characters who seem, in some sense, to be lost in the ether.
Yeah.
Of jump points or the third dimension, because we don't know what happened to Leonard, to Captain. I've even forgotten his name. He's such an ordinary guy.
Of the Solomon.
The captain of the Solomon.
Yeah.
So his ship's called the Solomon. So we remember the ship. We can't remember his name.
Laramie Stevens.
Stevens of the Solomon.
I will say this though. I think that failure is more interesting than success, because in failure you can like with Dr. Valen's, you can fail doing something insane, and with the founders of Rayari, it was failing, daring to do something crazy and something new, and only getting caught up into a.
Whereas with Stevens, I actually think he succeeded.
Yeah,
he succeeded in escaping the pirates. That
I think he was a very.
But the problem is, he's stuck.
Both of yours are very kind of like Xi'an folk stories, because a lot of Xi'an folk stories end with the heroes kind of going off into time immemorial and not being dead, but like being out of time, sort of like King Arthur. One day King Arthur will return and set everything right. So I think any Xi'an listening will love both of those stories.
There we go.
Because both those people could come back.
I mean, it's very appropriate that Dr. Valen's was in fact funded by the Xi'an government, so it was it works. All right, well that's our shorter episode. Go ahead, Al.
Well, in terms of Captain Stevens, he does keep coming back. At least his voice and his radio messages keep coming back. So it seems to say he is out there.
Let me put my tinfoil hat on. I've got a theory of Stevens. Stevens is actually an AI. Discuss. He's an experimental AI. We know that the advocacy does have a chance of murdering things they don't understand. Those of you who've seen my episode on Carracks and why they're cursed. So who knows? Who knows? Captain Stevens of the Solomon is the AI that's running the Solomon somewhere and constantly comes back, only to be snuffed out again.
Take out those Carracks.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jale. Thank you, Al. Make sure you go follow their social medias. Where can they find you, Jale?
just put the link in the description.
I'll put the link in the description as always. And Al, where can they find you?
Law Masters, the Law Citizen podcast. Occasionally on the Captain's Table, but usually on Info Runners.
Both of those links will be into the description below. And as always, you can find me twitch.tv/theastropub or youtube.com/theastropub, or on podcasts. We're on Anchor now. Anchor.fm/theastropub, and it's also on Spotify and a bunch of other places as well. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.
And occasionally on Info Runners as well.
And occasionally on Info Runners, yes. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And like I say every time, remember, ex historia ad astra.